Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. We know we have been away for a very long time. That's because the Colts had been away for a very long time. The way our schedule usually works is that Nate and I are off when the Colts are off in the summer. That's what we did again this year. We are back. We have now talked to Chris Ballard. We've seen a practice. We've gotten a chance to talk through Anthony Richardson. We've seen a lot of stuff. I think the hard part about these podcasts is, and Nate was just saying this before we came on, it feels like we're going to be doing some version of this podcast over and over and over again for maybe as long as training camp, maybe probably into the season. But let's talk quarterback. We'll talk quarterback. I think we should
change the name to maybe we should change the name to Cover-2 Quarterbacks because that's kind of all we do.
That's
fair.
fair.
I feel like we're going to be repeating this a lot, but I don't know. We'll have different things to offer, and I mean, that's what's fascinating about today was just the glimpse and just the start of this competition.
Yeah, I think the place I want to start first is Anthony Richardson's right shoulder. I think that now the Colts said that they were optimistic about his shoulder in the summer. I'm not convinced that's true. I kind of got the feeling before we left that maybe they were pretty worried about it, but it's fine. They're a little bit worried about overuse in terms of throwing too much, and so there's going to be some one-on-one stuff that he's not going to do early in camp, but he is practicing. He's throwing. He's doing stuff. I think baseline that he had to get that point, and it's not really something he could necessarily control because it's an injury and you don't know how, and shoulders are notoriously fickle. But just in terms of like realistically for this training camp competition, he needed to start this camp like this, where he's doing everything in full team and 7-on-7 and not on pup.
Yeah, because he's coming from behind in a way. He didn't have the time in the spring. He didn't have, the time with the install and all of that. It helped the fact that Daniel Jones was the new guy to the roster, so he's the one who needed to learn the playbook, learn more of the players. But there's still a lot of that Anthony's going to have to get to do too, because it's not like he's played in that playbook and with these players that much. And they want to use more of a playbook designed to the dual run threat ability of these quarterbacks now that they have two of them and can use them interchangeably like that. So Anthony, yeah, he needed to be back and needed to just get reps and opportunities like he got today. Like it was interesting to see them run through so many 11-on-11 plays. They just kind of just rushed right into that, which is not usually, I feel like, how the first day of practice goes. But they know that that's what the number one thing this camp is going to be about: evaluating and developing these quarterbacks to decide on a starter and developing those skill players along with them. And the passing game is going to hold so many keys to everything this season, because we know they have a lot of talent and ability in the run game. They're bringing back a 1,400-yard rusher. Defense, we'll get into that at points. There's some concerns there, but it's certainly a unit that's gotten a big facelift and a lot more talent added to it this offseason. It's a roster built in the trenches. It's got a lot of investments in the pass catching levels, but now it's all the eyes are back on the quarterback. And so it's interesting to watch them go back and forth and in and out, trading off first team reps. And there was good and bad, I thought, from both of them, but it was just huge for Anthony to be able to get out there and get throwing again. And it's just going to be interesting to see if he can stack all these days, if he can do this, because it is interesting to hear him talk about the shoulder and what's going on with it. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know that we will get 100% clarity on exactly what that was. It was something, but he made it clear it's something more than just soreness. But he felt like he could throw through it. He wanted to throw through it. I mean, part of that, I think, is his competitive nature, trying to win this job and urgency of the moment. They're erring more on caution, so I do think they were worried about it. But this is the second time that this has happened post-surgery, where he's had to be shut down because the arm is needs that rest. And who knows how many other times that could have popped up, because he's had these other injuries that have taken him off the field and stopped him from throwing in that time. Usually, other injuries related to when he's been running. So I'm curious to see, can he stack all these days together? Can he get the consistent reps to not only win the job, but take that necessary development step that he's going to have to take in what I think is a make or break year 3 for him? He doesn't want to admit that it is. Chris Ballard doesn't want to admit that it is. It frankly is, though. I can't describe this year as anything but completely make or break for Anthony Richardson, which makes it make or break for Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen, and pretty much everybody else.
Yeah, as far as the make or break part of it, like we've talked about on this podcast before, but I'll remind everybody, after this year is when teams start to make decisions on whether or not they're going to pick up their 5th year option for a first round pick for Anthony Richardson, who obviously was a first round pick. You can get around that. The Packers were able to get around that with Jordan Love. But I think the other thing is we've got to think about where we are in terms of just what's going on right now. The Colts felt that they needed to bring in competition for Richardson this past offseason. So if he doesn't play well again, or if he's hurt again or whatever, and I want to get back to the hurt thing in a second, but I'm just throwing out stuff to get to a certain point. If it's more of the same with him, you're going from a place where you already felt that you needed competition for him. Like, wouldn't the logical next step be to start thinking about moving on?
Yeah. Well, not only is it for their part, but on his part too, it's not working here at that point. Something is not working here. And certainly to this point, we have to see how obviously everything's about how it plays out. But to this point, you can make arguments on both ends of who's not delivered for whom. It's kind of on all of them, I think, in different ways. And some things that are unfortunate with the injuries, as we'll get to, like you said. But, like one thing, and this kind of lets us talk about the Chris Ballard press conference as well, just staying on this topic. But, he brought up that, like, he doesn't think it's a make or break season for Anthony Richardson because we'll look at Baker Mayfield and look at Sam Darnold and isn't it easy to look back now and say, hey, people gave up on them too early? And to that, I have two kind of thoughts. Number one, who is it that gave up on those two? Their teams did. Like, that's what we're talking about here. So, like, we can talk about everybody else's opinion and our evaluations. If they get to the point where they bench Anthony Richardson for the second time in 3 seasons, and then they have to decide on a 5th year option, I mean, that's just heading down that same path. But number two, I think the bigger lesson I take away from those two is, yes, it's fair to say that, like, there was more to get out of them than people saw at the time, that their team saw at the time, that they showed at the time. But that came with the change of scenery. If you go back and look at where both of those players were, their confidence was pretty crushed in different ways. Baker was sort of, the volatile kind of exploding, posting like these all, notes apps and calling out his coaches and all this kind of stuff that just like it was caving in on him. Sam Darnold kind of looked like a ghost in a shell of himself by the end of going through that in New York. Like, these guys needed something different, a totally new coach, new scheme, new city, totally different expectations than being the top 5 pick in the draft. Anthony Richardson's going to need the same thing if he gets to that point. And I'm not saying that he will. And that's certainly the hope for everybody, is that he does it, or that he, obviously that he ascends. And this is more of a story of, like, working through some early struggles and hitting that upside. But, like, there just isn't a world where you can bench a quarterback twice in 3 years at this age with this expectation level and think he's not going to feel that and need something to change beyond that. So I think they're just kind of saying that just in the event that Daniel Jones is the quarterback that they pick, or maybe that they have to play with Daniel Jones for a while because of injury. But the reality is, like, everybody needs Anthony to win this job and stay on the field for most of the season, for him to work here and for them to stay here, and for really all of this to work. I think hinges on that.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the injury piece real quick because I was thinking about this the other day. I think that of all the stuff that's been discussed with Richardson and everyone's gone back and forth, I actually think we haven't talked about the injuries enough. In terms of, I think it touches on everything a little more than anybody realizes. Like, I think if you're in the Richardson just was never going to be able to develop into a thrower camp. He never had a shot. They never should have gone with him. Well, I would say that the counterpoint that the other side has, where that injuries have kept him from doing the stuff that would take you to develop. I would say that's fair. On the other side, I think there's obviously been the idea that the Colts have failed Richardson. I think that's probably true to some degree. I also was thinking about this the other day. Usually when you have a new quarterback, and we've unfortunately, I think for Colts fans are pretty used to this now. When there's a new quarterback in town, it tends to take 6 to 8 games ish of herky jerkiness before an offense really before a coaching staff really figures out like what a quarterback wants and what they're good at. And like they always say, like you ask the quarterback what he likes. I think it's bigger than that. I think that the coaching staffs don't say this, but I think it's bigger than that. I think a quarterback can like a play without actually being great at running it. I think the game, I would say that the game feedback probably tells them some of that stuff. Well, here's the thing about Richardson's injuries. They haven't had a whole lot of chunks to find some of that stuff out. Like they've worked really hard to come up with stuff for Richardson and find plays that he likes and do all this stuff, right? You still have to test it in a game and see how some of it, like I know some of it they got from college, from high school, from all that stuff. Some of it you have to test in an NFL game and see if his reads are the same, if his reads are what they think they're going to be, and work. They haven't really had a chance to do that because he's never started, I think, more than 5 games in a row at the NFL level. So, like the injury piece, him being out 17 of 34 games, it's huge. It's huge for everything. It's huge for him because he doesn't get to develop. It's huge for the coaching staff because they don't have a chance to learn the stuff they need to learn about what he does well and what he likes best. It's bad for the offense because the offense is kind of always changing personalities. Especially with Minshew and Gardner or Minshew and Flacco. Chris Ballard said flat out yesterday, those guys, it's a completely different offense with them. He said he thinks it's more of a similar offense with Daniel Jones. I would, but at the same time, like there's going to be stuff that one guy likes to run better and one guy doesn't like to better. It's kind of the same offense, but not really the same offense. Like there's just a lot of stuff that they've got to figure out that they haven't had a chance to because of the injuries. And that's the other reason I think that he had to get through this shoulder is like, it's just, if you go back to when Chris Ballard said they were going to get competition at the very first beginning part of the offseason, the first reason he cited was injury. If you go back and look at that press conference, that's the first reason he cited. He hasn't been able to stay on the field. I think it has tentacles that are they go much further and they go into much more detail than anybody really talks about.
Yeah, I think the injuries at this point have sort of created this ultimate catch-22 with Anthony Richardson, which is he is arguably the greatest athlete we have ever seen at the quarterback position, just in terms of pure size, speed, burst. And to use that ability to get the most out of the type of style of quarterback that he was put on this earth to be is going to be to risk that kind of injury and let that stuff pile up. And, so there's a catch-22 in terms of how you design that offense. There's also just the catch-22 in the fact that he came into the league, whether you liked Anthony Richardson, the idea of him, what he showed at Florida, whether you were out on that, either way, he was a developmental pick all the way. This wasn't Joe Burrow coming from LSU. And so a developmental player has to be on the field, has to stay on the field. So it's Joe Burrow has missed a good amount of time as well to injuries. Not as much, not as like consistently interrupting as this, but he's had some huge chunks of season he's missed. He was not a developmental quarterback though. There weren't times when he got hurt that people thought, oh geez, how's he ever going to learn all this stuff and develop? Like he had a lot of that already. It's unfortunate to have him out there. And then he comes back and he's comeback player of the year because he already was that good. He didn't have to learn it. Anthony has to learn it. That was always going to be the model for him. Both learn it mentally, learn it, accuracy, all the passing mechanics, but also learn him learning his style and them learning him. And it goes back to the fact that he didn't play very much in college either. This wasn't a guy that he was this ultimate wild card of what can he be once he's out there playing a lot and developing a lot. And it's as big of a what if as it's ever been because the injuries have made it so herky-jerky. And so I do think that's a fair point on the coaching staff. Not only the fact that they haven't had time to really let this build one game to the next and figure out what he likes and doesn't like, but the fact that, frankly, it was on them to a point to keep him from getting hurt. And so they're trying to not introduce hit after hit after hit. And this, I think, also got into a lesson they learned just in the stylistic nature of the backup, why they went with Daniel Jones, is that they knew that if they lose Anthony Richardson last year or the year before, the offense has to change with the backup quarterback. Not only is that just hard to game plan and kind of manage the way you built your personnel, but it's really a whiplash on young players. And I think I felt that a lot last year. They had a really young offense around these guys, and to switch the styles of the quarterbacks as much as they did, to go from we're a quarterback dual threat zone read run team to we're going to be a drop back, balls out quick out of the pocket pass team, and you don't know which of those is going to be week to week when Anthony Richardson's questionable as much as he is. It just kind of disoriented everybody. And so that's why all of this is going to come back to him getting on the field quite a bit. I think we have to keep the expectations in check, though, because people often talk about injuries as an all or nothing thing. He's either always on the field or he's always hurt. In Anthony's case, he's been often hurt, but you should aim for someone like Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts in terms of their ability to stay on the field, because those are running quarterbacks, but it's not like they play every single game. So Jalen Hurts missed 2 games last year, 2 games back in 2022. He's played through a little bit of other stuff. Lamar Jackson, he's become pretty durable. He's only missed 1 game. I think that was intentional the last 2 years, but he had a stretch in there where he missed 10 combined games the 2 years before that. So, but to me, 13 is that number. Can he play 13 games and not play them, but finish them? That's been a big part, is he hasn't finished many games. But if he can play and finish 13 games, I think they will be able to answer all this stuff or get answers on all this stuff about, is he developing? Does he have that chance to be a passer? Is the coaching staff capable of maximizing that skill set and fitting it within the offense? Are they able to grow together? And if Daniel Jones steps in for 4 games because he's here to be a high-level backup who can run a lot of that, I think it's a great situation. More than 4 games for Daniel Jones, and significantly more games than 4 games for Daniel Jones, I think gets us in a pretty tricky spot as far as his evaluation and just how much you could believe that he's even going to be out there, let alone be the player that you want him to be.
Yeah, let's get into. We've seen one practice. I was gonna say I thought this was a really smart thing from Shane Steichen that I hadn't really considered. Chris Ballard said, he said no real restrictions other than volume restrictions, which is a silly sentence if you read it written. I kind of give him a little break on talking, because sometimes when you talk, you say things poorly. I do too. But so basically what he's saying is they want to make sure Anthony Richardson doesn't have too many throws on his arm. I think you made a really interesting point earlier about, it was last summer that he, after he was coming back, that there was sudden issue in the joint. Then again this summer, you made the point that the injuries to other parts of his body have maybe helped him avoid the shoulder being an issue again. I think I honestly had not made that connection in my head to the two things because of the recovery, but I think you're right to do that. I think it's right and smart to do that. You and I are both baseball fans. I think we're a little more used to shoulder surgery than people who are just NFL fans, but shoulders have a tendency to linger. So I think you're right to point that out. I had not considered that.
Well, what I like about the baseball analogy, just real quick, is what they say all the time in baseball when you have really young pitchers who haven't played a lot, is that there's only so many more innings they're going to be able to throw this year than last year. It's like if a guy's career high in innings pitched at any level is like 90, they're not going to let him go 180. Like it's just waiting for a disaster to strike because it's just sort of the torque and the wear and tear on the shoulder. So it's not the exact same sport, but I do think there are sometimes some crossovers like that.
Well, and usually if they're coming off of surgery, they try to keep those innings down too, even if it's an older pitcher. Mm-hmm. The throwing motion stuff, I think some people would be surprised. I've spent some time around Tom House, and like Tom House once said that Drew Brees and Nolan Ryan essentially have the same throwing mechanics. Mm-hmm. Like obviously very different shoulders, very different velocities, all that stuff, but just the pure mechanics of throwing, which is Tom House's specialty. He said, the act of throwing a baseball and act of throwing a football are not as different as people think. The release point may be a little different. But I think that point is interesting to think about. It's interesting for us to look at going through here because the Colts are going to monitor his workload, but what happens in the season, all that stuff. Going forward, what they're going to do is they're not going to give him time off during team. They're going to give him time off during individual, which I think is really smart because really those routes on air, those throws to receivers, or routes on air for those who don't know, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's the warm-up throws to wide receivers when there's no defensive back covering them. Like those are not the throws. I mean, they're probably evaluating some of those throws, but those aren't the throws they're really, really evaluating. They want to see him in the team stuff. And the practice today, what we saw was each quarterback got 16 snaps in. There were 3 11-on-11 periods and 1 7-on-7 period. This is an aside. Nate will laugh at this. It's infuriating me that I have to pay attention to 7-on-7.
Yeah, it is not exactly real football out there.
But they're clearly using it as an evaluation, so I'm going to have to. That also means that I will not be able to watch as much one-on-one pass rush. I hate it. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. They gave 16 snaps to both of them. The throwing attempts, if you're running RPO, which they will, like they're not going to be able to necessarily entirely script out that Daniel Jones throws 12 passes and Anthony Richardson throws 12 passes. Mm-hmm. So there's probably going to be some differences in attempts. It's just one day. This is just an observation. I don't like today. Actually, to me, is maybe the most indicative of why you can't just use one day to draw sweeping conclusions. Because I don't feel like I learned anything definitive today. Daniel Jones, I had him 6 of 7. You could have him 7 of 8 if you counted a pass he threw behind him, which is technically a run and would be counted as a run during the season. I had him at 6 of 7 in 11-on-11. One of those passes was to himself because Grover Stewart smacked it back at his face. I think I had him 2 of 5 in 7-on-7. Richardson was 4 of 11 in 11-on-11 and 0 of 3. He also was on the receiving end of a lot of drops. It was a very dropsy practice. Mm-hmm. But I would say this, like if you went in there and you said, you know what, I really don't like Daniel Jones, I really like Anthony Richardson, I think you probably decided to come out of that practice feeling like, hey, that looked great for me. If you're the other way, I think you could probably say, hey, that looked great for me. It's just not enough of a sample size. It was like us doing this after the first day it's just a really big reminder. Like, we need all these practices and all these games to make a decision, to have a real opinion on who's the best quarterback for this team.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, this is going to be an ongoing evaluation. The sample size is going to just keep growing by the day, but still remain small until we get into preseason games. And eventually, at some point, they have to make a decision. And they say that they're going to take as much time as they need, and they're not going to worry about, things like getting the offense a consistent starter. That they really want to take this as far as they need to, because 2 years ago, they said a lot of the same things, but they got carried away by Anthony Richardson's upside and pretty good first quarter of a preseason game, and then quickly named him the starter. And they felt like that was not the right process at the time. So it'll be an ongoing evaluation today. I felt like the only thing that my big takeaway today, like we're not going to have full answers on much of anything. I did notice the areas and then asked Anthony about it, the areas that I thought he was working on while he was throwing on his own away from the team and working with personalized trainers and whatnot. I just noticed that I've always felt like his hardest throws have been the east-west outside the numbers throws. That goes back to the NFL Combine when I watched him there at Lucas Oil Stadium standing next to C.J. Stroud, who's about as good at that throw as you could possibly find. And it was jarring how much he struggled there. And, of course, he made up for it with launching the ball 65 yards down the field. But it was that's what we talk about the layups. And sometimes those guys are wide open. Shane Steichen schemes open guys wide open against man coverage, crossers, and quick outs, and he has struggled with that consistently. That looked better today. Just the ball placement and the trajectory of the ball. It was less like he was trying to guess where a guy was going to be and just fire it there. It was more of a throwing motion. So I asked him I left it open-ended though, and just said, was there a specific area you were trying to target? And he said, everybody knows I can launch the ball down the field, but it's those short targets, those short moving targets that he really wanted to work on. And so that's what I have to watch more for, because it's just been one day, and it's light challenges right now. The more they get into a game setting and you get sped up on some of that, that's going to help us more. But I did like that. I just liked hearing that he was intentional about that. Like, one of the issues with Anthony, one of the things he's had to grow on over the past couple of years, frankly, is self-awareness of his game and where he's at with it. I think there's just been times when he hasn't come off as like he is aware enough of what he's lacking.
I think you're thinking of Houston, right?
Yeah. When he said, "I'm a great passer."
When he said, "I'm a great passer," after a first half where he went 2 of 15.
Yeah, that was the most jarring moment. And there's some others. There's some others out there too, but if you just take it back to that quote, that him admitting that he needs a lot of work in the short area is admitting he's not a great passer. And so this was just a nice intentional step, which is what this offseason had to be. Like, he won't have a chance here if he's not aware and intentional about fixing that. So it's not a guarantee that he is going to fix it, because we see a lot of guys come to the league and they never do, but it gives him a chance. I feel better about his chances of making those corrections now that, just hearing that and getting to see a little bit of that work in action. And that's what I'm excited to watch for these future practices.
Yeah, the Daniel Jones thing, I think that stuck out. I was probably the best throw of the day by either guy, or biggest play for sure. Was he threw a go fade, whatever you want to call it, down the sideline to Anthony Gould. I think the thing that stuck out to me is how early he threw it. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that he has not in his career been a productive thrower down the field. I think the Colts think that some of that has to do with the talent he was working with in New York. Statistically speaking, he just hasn't been very good at it, right? I would say this. I think if maybe you are not the type of quarterback who can throw the sort of rainbow that allows your guy to get under it and make the big leaping catch, the guys I know, the guys I've watched before who could make up for that were the guys who could make the read and throw it early. And that's what he did on the throw to Gould. He threw it really early. He threw it really early, and he recognized that Gould had beaten his defender, threw it really early, let him adjust the ball on his own. If he can do that, I think he probably is going to end up having a better shot than if he's, trying to hang a giant ball up in the air, kind of after the fact. He's going to have to do it on his ability to read the defense and make the right play out of it.
Yeah, that was encouraging in that way, is that he said afterwards, like, he feels like he's always been willing to go down the field. So maybe he agrees that he just didn't always have that talent. I mean, he had Malik Neighbors last year, but it was for like half a season of that. So we'll see a little bit on that. I just think his sample was big enough that I just don't know that you can always say that it's all the receivers. I think they had some skill sets who could get down the field, like Darius Slayton, even if it wasn't, a whole lot more than that. But it's just something he has to prove. But that was a moment, one early moment of proving at least the willingness, at least sort of the understanding of the offense, and that's the play they need to go out and get. And it is going to be really important for him, because, like, if they go with Daniel Jones, or whether they choose to or have to, however that goes, like, they're going to lose something in terms of just the vertical nature, because that's true with almost any quarterback. I mean, Anthony Richardson threw the longest non-Hail Mary, that Next Gen has ever tracked last year. So anybody else is going to have something less than that, and just in terms of field stretching. But you don't want to get it down to the Gardner Minshew, Matt Ryan level, because if it becomes that, then we've lost Alec Pierce, and that can't work for the Shane Steichen offense that's about explosive plays and marrying that with all the focus teams put on the run game. So, yeah.
I would just say, personally, I really don't want to go back to the Gardner Minshew days of just either not seeing people down the field or not throwing it down the field. Like, you can tell the listeners how infuriating it is, because, like, here's the thing, like, when you're watching at home on TV, like, I think, I know some of you listeners are probably season ticket holders, but a lot of you are probably watching on TV. When you're watching at home, you can't see the routes. They don't give you that unless it's like a replay. Where we sit and where we're at the games, you can see the routes. And with Minshew, there were so many times that Alec Pierce was running by himself, or running two steps ahead of a defender 50 yards downfield, and he just wouldn't pull the trigger on it. I can't imagine Alec Pierce. I'll say this: everything anyone's ever said about Alec Pierce is that he is the type of player who can handle that and just deal with the indecisive, like and process it and not let it affect how he handles it. It had to be frustrating. It had to be.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it'll be more frustrating now, because
nobody wants to go back to that. There's no way Shane Steichen, who loves the explosive play, had the first receiver to have 20 plus yards per reception over like a decent amount of catches since Deshaun Jackson, and he wants to just put that guy back in his pocket. There's no way. So if Jones ends up playing, he's got to do a better job of getting the ball at least down the field to that target for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason they went from Gardner Minshew to Joe Flacco last year, is that they felt like they had introduced that back into the offense. And then, then they had a trade-off there where he's a statue in the pocket, and he's not really the accurate short area guy either. So they're trying to kind of do a mix of all this right now. That throw that Jones made to Anthony Gould, his answers about, I've always been willing to do this. This is his first step to obviously trying to win this job with a very critical piece of it. But it's also the first step to shedding the nickname that I gave him in the spring, which is Gardner with legs. So we will see how long I can use that, or maybe I will eat crow eventually and just say, you've graduated from my idea of you as Gardner with legs to Gardner plus arm strength with legs, which all of a sudden doesn't fit at all. So, as much as we're watching Anthony Richardson evolve before us, there is an interesting part of it. It's watching Daniel Jones try and see if he can do things with a skill set of receivers in an offense that's that he just hasn't been in before. And we'll see how much there is to pull out of that as well.
Okay. We will talk more about the quarterbacks, I promise. If you read my observations, you'll notice that I've added something. I'm going to put a tracker in there. We're just going to keep their camp stats day over day. Haven't done it before. Frankly, we haven't really had an open competition like this before. I don't think any of us really believed that the competition with Minshew was open. I think the Colts have kind of admitted that, said it without saying it. So we're going to do that. You can keep checking on that. I want to talk about Mooney Ward. I would say that in my time covering the Colts, there has been one cornerback who was really, really fun, other than Kenny Moore. Throw Kenny Moore out, like Kenny Moore in the slot. Kenny Moore had to play the day today. But Kenny Moore in the slot, throw that out. One outside cornerback who was really fun to watch on a daily basis, and it was Stephon Gilmore. It's one practice in, small sample size. I think Charvarius Ward, who goes by Mooney, is going to be the second because, man, he was fun. He did something that, Alec Pierce got stretched out today. I think he was maybe a little bit tight or something. But early in the practice, Ward did something that most people don't really do or can't do against Pierce. He erased the deep route from him. Jones got Pierce and Ward one-on-one, and Ward just beat him with positioning. Like, the really good cornerbacks can do this on deep balls where you have the sideline. It's another thing, and you can pin a guy against it, and they can't get going. Ward did that to him. It was really impressive to watch. He had another break. He had a couple other breakups. I think he forced a drop on Michael Pittman Jr. at one point. Just really, really fun. The kind of cornerback they haven't really had. I think like truly great cornerback play is really fun to watch in practice. And I know the Colts haven't had much of it, but yeah, really impressive stuff from Mooney Ward to start. Because we didn't really see him. The other thing is we didn't really see him in the summer. He was kind of on he spent some time with his family. When he was there in mini camp, they were kind of not doing much. Like this was our first chance to really get to see him play, and man, he's something.
Well, yeah, it's also the fact that minicamp practices are kind of fake. So these are more real. These are more fun. I'd like the comparison to Stephon Gilmore because that summer was fascinating to watch him give Alec Pierce about as much of a welcome to the NFL experience as he could possibly muster. Like that was just kind of the way Stephon did that. But and so there's similarities between them is that like you can see their IQ and their confidence to play the ball is so high. They play with that all-pro pedigree, but they play with a lot of physicality too, just really physical at the catch point, which is what we saw in that rep with Michael Pittman Jr. that he turned into that Mooney forced into a drop. There's one big difference between these two, though, is that Stephon Gilmore is very quiet as a talker. I love talking to him. He was incredibly insightful and generous. Mooney is hilarious to talk to. He is just sort of a guy that he seems like he loves talking to people. He loves being around people, but also he talks his talk. He talks like a guy who's an all-pro. I mean, he's not afraid to say what's going on. The fact that, like he brought up that he's trying to prove that that his one all-pro season wasn't a fluke when he had a down year last year. And I asked him, I said, do you feel like people look at it as a fluke? And he said, I don't know, but I got paid anyway, and I'm going to get paid again. And it's just like, and he's right. And it's like that's kind of that's one of my favorite types of players to cover in this league. Maybe my favorite is that really like star outside cornerback, because I think they're fun to watch them try and neutralize passing games, the one-on-one matchups with some of these amazing receivers. But it's the fact that there's so much personality and swagger that comes with that type of player. Darius Slay is one of my favorite players I've ever covered, and I'm getting shades of that with Mooney. And I don't. This team needed that. This team obviously they needed his play in the worst way. To have an outside corner with all pro abilities. Like you said, Gilmore is the only thing even in that stratosphere in recent years, I think. But it's also the sort of the pedigree, the confidence, the having been there, knowing I've been there, and just raising the boats with that kind of talk. Frankly, it's like a lot of what went on last year that DeForest Buckner brought up and Kenny Moore a little bit, is that this defense has some guys who talk, but without any standing to do so. And so their voice doesn't carry all that much. Mooney is a completely different thing, not only as a player who's been an all-pro, but a guy who's played in 2 Super Bowls for 2 different teams and won one. And you just feel his presence on the field and you feel it off the field. And I'm excited to cover this guy for sure.
Yeah, I thought he was something to watch. The other interesting piece from today, something to monitor, when they started practice, Ward was at one corner, Kenny Moore was in the slot, and Justin Wally, the rookie out of Minnesota, was the other outside corner over Jalen Jones, over Juju Brents. I do think there is one caveat I want to put out there real quick. Both of those players were hurt at times during minicamp. They both of them were out. Jalen Jones, I don't think, really played very much at all in the summer. So maybe this reflects a time on task with Lou Anarumo's defense type of thing. On the other hand, Jalen Jones is a 2-year starter who's played something like 2,000 snaps in the NFL, and they sent out the rookie before that. That is a very interesting battle to me. Everything that happens at corner is a very interesting battle, and we got a surprise right off the bat, I think, by the 3rd-round pick coming out there as the other starting corner today. Yeah, we didn't see anything. I don't think we got a chance to really see anything special from him today. A lot of the stuff to his side and the outside was short, but they really, really like that kid.
Yeah, he's the rookie they've raved about the most, just in terms of like where they got him and what they think they're getting. Obviously, Tyler Warren's their favorite rookie because they picked him above the other guys. But every year there seems to be this player or 2 players at the front office just really feels like they obviously love to take him. And in Wally's case, earlier than a lot of us thought they would, but that like keeps growing once he's in the building, once they get a look at him out there on the field. It felt like it was either him or DJ Giddens was that player kind of in the early spring. And then now you see that's taken over here. And what's interesting is that, like, you know, the Colts have always loved Jalen Jones. I like Jalen Jones. Sometimes I think they've gone a little far with that, at least in terms of like they thought he could be a number 1 corner last year and put him in some unfortunate spots. But they've always thought Shane Steichen's always been a big fan of his. Chris Ballard's a big fan of his. But what's different is they have a new defensive coordinator with 2 new DB coaches, and those are the guys who are going to set the depth chart. So this is their way of saying, at the very least, that he's got a shot. I don't think they would put him here if it's just a time on task and this is enjoy your one day, you're never going to start again type of moment. He's got a real shot to do this, partly because I think he also fits Anarumo's defense a little better than Jalen Jones. Jalen Jones was drafted for the Seattle-style Gus Bradley defense that's, tall, hulking corners on the outside to be physical and press, funnel players into the safeties, play more zone and short areas. Jalen Jones, he's not like completely that, but that is more of his skill set. Whereas Lou Anarumo, there's a lot of different coverages in his bag, but they really like man coverage. And Justin Wally, when they talked up drafting him, was about we see tons of man coverage ability out of him. The other thing I think that we don't see as much in these settings, but I remember them talking about how much they loved Justin Wally's willingness and ability to tackle. That's something this defense has to get better at from last year. It's not Jalen Jones's best part of his game. So I think that's another area where Wally could catch up. So we'll see. I think that's all of a sudden becoming, behind quarterback, I think probably the most interesting position battle to me, because a lot of the other ones, and even quarterback, I'd put this in there, is that like for example, they've talked up Tanner Bortolini against Danny Pinter at center. I mean, first of all, that's just not as exciting as an outside corner spot. But I still think that position battle is more about like Tanner Bortolini is either going to win it or lose it. Like, you know what Danny Pinter is at this point. They drafted Bortolini to take it. So if he doesn't take it, it's because he's not ready to. This cornerback spot, that was two players I think they legitimately like, who are very different. And it's a real battle of like which guy can just edge the other out when there's only one spot for him to play, because you're never going to sit Charvarius Ward and you're not going to sit Kenny Moore. There's one spot for them to play, and there's two guys. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that sticks out to me, I talked to Wally in the spring, and I said, hey, I said something along the lines of, hey, you've really turned heads. People really like what you've done so far. Are you surprised at how comfortable you felt? And he said, I don't feel comfortable at all. He said, I actually feel like this has been like the hardest football I've ever played. And he felt that way. The coaches were raving about him. That was another thing that kind of surprised me was, this kid feels like his head is swimming and he keeps making plays. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that, I mean, I kind of made this point already, but the fact they have two new defensive backs coaches, and like that was our first signal, on top of it being Lou Anarumo's background, that was going to be the focus of the offseason, was the secondary. And they go up and they sign Charvarius Ward and they sign Kim Bynum. But now they have Chris Hewitt, Jerome Henderson, and Lou Anarumo, three guys who've been longtime position coaches in the secondary, who were then going through the draft evaluations. And Justin Wally was one of the players they were kind of banging the table for. And again, looking back, I remember one of the reasons I thought, like, I wasn't super high on that pick just in the moment, looking at the value and the needs, is that didn't feel like a need, because we're saying you just signed Charvarius Ward. You guys talk about how much you like Jalen Jones. We'll see on Juju Brents, but he certainly has pedigree and talent if he can stay healthy. It felt like they had much bigger needs, like linebacker that they left completely unaddressed. I think that shows you even more how much they liked Wally, because I think they probably agreed with that. But if you're going to make it about this offseason about the secondary, and you have these coaches you really trust, these secondary coaches, three of them on your staff, if they are pounding the table for a guy, it's a good bet to make on him. It's kind of like when they lured Reggie Wayne into coaching, and then he was pounding the table like none other for Josh Downs in the third round. And Chris Ballard doesn't usually draft guys like Josh Downs. He did, and it's been a great pick. So we'll see how it goes with Wally, but I'm seeing the vision a lot more than I did initially. There's a trade-off to it, because if we talk about linebacker, I'm about as concerned as I've ever been with that spot, but there's a trade-off to all of this. You're going to have weaknesses on a team. And last year, it's just funny. A year ago at this time, I felt like every podcast was us ripping their secondary and talking about how dangerous that was. And all of a sudden here, we're talking about, like, can they get Justin Wally on the field, or do they have too many good players there? Like, it's amazing, just the talent level in the emphasis with the coaching staff and the scheme, how night and day that group is right now to just a year ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. Linebacker, Zaire Franklin is not practicing right now. They expect him back soon. Jalen Carlisle is back and is practicing right away. They were rotating a lot. I think from a roster standpoint, I think maybe Austin Ajike got some. He had a really nice pass breakup today. That made me think that maybe he was going to get a chance. Former undrafted guy who spent the first 2 years of his career on practice squads. But here's the thing, like, I just realized I don't know how to say this poor man's name. I need to find a pronunciation. The linebacker they signed from the Bengals, Joe Bocci.
Joe Bocci, a guy, fun fact, that I covered for one season at Michigan State. So that's how I know his name.
Joe Bocci. He was getting some starting stuff. He's played like 220 defensive snaps in 5 years. Cam McGrone has been almost entirely a special teamer. He was getting some starting snaps. Ajike hasn't played. Like, there's just and Chris Ballard said the other day, I think, you these guys at that position, you can find them without the pedigree. But like, I just feel nervous as a as an observer or somebody who, if I was making a roster, going with guys who you just really didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to start by giving, to be fair, I want to give Chris Ballard a lot of credit because this offseason he has addressed a lot of the pitfalls and stubbornness that we've been hammering on. You know, the secondary, everything we just said, he was able to look at, not only is that the problem, but we're going to spend early, we're going to win bidding wars, we're going to keep going after it, we're going to get more numbers there than we ever feel like we need because it's that important. And, you know, there's other spots like that he's done that with. I feel like linebacker though is the weak spot this year, the blind spot, I guess I'd say. And like part of it is the fact that you do have to. Every team's going to have a weakness, and like I don't mind that if the one position you're going to go light on is linebacker, like that's easier to stomach than like last year at the secondary, which I just felt like there's no way they were going to have a good defense with that secondary. I don't say that about the linebacker core, but I do think the blind spot here is the fact that, and he brought this up yesterday, is that they've had success drafting that position and finding some diamonds in the rough. And he's convinced and almost daring himself to do it again. It's like, I'll show you that I can find one of these. And I just feel like every year he does that with the position of like, I want to prove that I have a very sneaky plan here that's going to pay off. It's just trying to prove a point more than win the games with those players that you need. When there's like, I mean, there are helpful players out there. I mean, they're not great guys, but there's guys who played, who have experience, who frankly know what it's like to be out on the field. I mean, at all positions. Julian Blackmon just got signed yesterday by the Saints. So that's an example, another depressed market that always has guys available. So they have options if they want them. The thing that I think Chris Ballard, not only is he playing with fire just on the idea of going with diamonds in the rough, I don't think he's evaluating his own track record properly, because the guys they have really hit on were day 2 guys. Bobby Okereke was a 3rd-round pick. Shaquille Leonard was a 2nd-round pick. And I know you brought up yesterday, you know, nobody knew who Shaq Leonard was. Well, I understand he went to a small school, but he was a 2nd-round pick. So this isn't a matter of like they drafted a guy in the 2nd round this year that we were just criticizing because who the heck is this guy and why is that? It isn't. There's no investment here. The only investment at the position is Zaire Franklin, who was a success story as a 7th-round pick that I think they, you know, that rose up and became something good. He's not on the field right now, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, they don't act concerned about it. I need to see him back out there personally, because I just have a little PTSD of 2 years ago when they said they weren't concerned about a linebacker's ankle and he never played well again. Obviously that's an extreme situation with Shaquille Leonard, but there's just, it just underscores that, like, I don't know that Zaire Franklin can leave the field at all and have you feel good about that. And that's what we're kind of seeing out there with guys that, and I don't know, maybe as we watch, maybe these guys will stand out more. They'll make plays. Maybe it's absolutely possible that guys, I don't know everything about these guys by any means, but the reality is they have never done it. They've never been out there on the field. The first time that they go out there week 1 for like, it'll be the first start for almost all of them outside of like Jacob Wilson, who was a 3rd-round pick back by the Browns. And fun fact, he hasn't played in any game in 2 years. So like, they don't really have anybody who's played in the past 2 years at any level of starting defense whatsoever if Zaire Franklin's not out there. And it's a little concerning because, you know, when you're constantly trying to like hide a position, you know, yes, good coaches find ways to do that to a level, but good offensive coordinators also find ways to make you pay for it. And so
right,
they're gonna go up against that this year.
Yeah, I mean, like a very simple way to exploit what they're doing is just, you know, Lou Anarumo has talked about, well, when teams are in 4 receivers or whatever, I want corners on the field. We'll just stay in heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Force linebackers on the field, you know, and maybe Hunter Wohler allows you not to do that a little bit, maybe, because he's played linebacker at the college level, but like,
that's a bet though. That is,
I mean,
a gamble. We haven't even seen him practice
on the schedule, right?
What's that?
Denver's on the schedule, right?
Are they? They don't go to. Are they all one of the home games?
It's a home game, so it's the second week of the season. Let me tell you right now, somebody who's covered Sean Payton before, Sean Payton will just put 2 tight ends and 2 fullbacks on the field and 1 receiver and just run at you. You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be. Oh, they got Jim Harbaugh on the Chargers. You think they're going 4 wide? I don't think so.
No one has ever loved a tight end more than Jim Harbaugh, especially a blocking tight end.
They got the 49ers. You don't think Kyle Shanahan is going to figure out the personnel that's a problem here? I mean, look, like every team's going to have a weakness. I'm not trying to act like it's a crime that they didn't invest a ton there. It's
if you're going to have a weakness, linebacker is the one to have.
Yeah.
But
it's just interesting right now. When I looked at the starting defense, and when they put Wally out there, I was really impressed by a lot of just thinking through the talent levels and what some of these guys have proven at almost every spot. I mean, to think that like Nick Cross is coming off a decent year, his best year yet, contract year, 3rd round pick, and he's like easily the least counted on secondary member other than Justin Wally now, who's sliding in, behind 3 Pro Bowl level players in that secondary. You've got a defensive line that's just chock full of, 1st round picks and high contracts at every position, to the point where, one of them isn't going to start, either Kwity Paye or Latu or JT Tuimoloau. So you see it almost every spot. And then to look at linebackers and be like, you have to Google these guys to see, have they ever been in a game before? And what college did they go to? And it's just very jarring. And I think there are absolutely ways that Lou Anarumo is going to compensate for this when he, that he loves to live in nickel all the time. Kenny Moore's going to be on the field all the time. Cam Bynum edition helps the middle of the field in a way that they didn't have last season. There's stuff like that, but you still got to have at least one linebacker on the field all the time. If Zaire Franklin's not healthy, who is that?
Yeah. Yep.
So, I do think it's back in a week, so who knows? But it's still.
I do think it's interesting to me that that Shagu Alobi, who has been a backup for Zaire Franklin in the past, was not among the starting linebackers today.
Yeah. I wonder if that is another indication to kind of where the coaching staff's heads are, is that the emphasis at just seems so much on coverage across the board. And Shagu Alobi is kind of that heat-seeking missile tackle guy. I think, and I don't know that any of these other guys you would call coverage guys exactly. They certainly haven't proven that, but they may have more of that kind of skill set. That's a little telling to me that the one guy that you feel like is the closest thing to somewhat a little bit established here is not the one playing. That's like they want to give looks to these other guys who, and a couple of them made some plays in coverage. So there is something to look at there, but it'll be interesting. The thing I understood not spending a draft pick on them, even though I probably would have by the 5th round, but they just felt like there weren't a lot of good cover linebackers in this draft. And that is hard to find out of the draft if you don't go early.
I know the Colts didn't really feel like this was a good linebacker draft.
I'm just shocked that they haven't signed one.
Yes.
I don't they talk about competition. The competition is undrafted guys.
They have competition. They have competition at linebacker, but the competition is essentially who can be the diamond in the rough.
Yeah. Like that. To say it's a competition just because you didn't add anybody and someone's got to go out there, I don't know that that's answering what they said they wanted to bring, which they're doing at most other spots. They're just not applying it to the linebacker, and I don't know, it's a little odd to me, but I just feel like there's every year going to be a little bit of a spot that Chris Ballard's trying to win a little bit of his own chess match with, and that's linebacker this year.
They really need Jalen Carlisle to play well. I think that's it for this podcast. We're going to have more as the days and weeks go along. It might be a little haphazard on terms of when we are able to tape these. A lot of it depends on what our writing responsibility is, what a lot of the other stuff is. But we are back. The Colts are back. The Cover-2 Podcast is back. I am Joel A. Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. Just stay on Indy Star. We've already written like 12 things or something in the first 2 days. I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot. Keep an eye on Indy Star's Colts page. We'll see where this quarterback competition goes, and we'll examine how this defense is shaping up under Lou Anarumo.